So we're in 1996.
Yeah.
I graduate in 96.
School's out. What did you expect, man?
The new Dad Rock! Dad by day! Podcaster by night! Hosts Keith and Steve, two college radio DJs in the 90s, helped expose bands like Nirvana, Pavement, and PJ Harvey. They went to shows, interviewed musicians, and reviewed albums for various Zionist papers. They worked security at concerts and once, even did loading for fish. Now, they're dads. Whether you want to explore lesser-known music or take a trip down memory lane, tune to the new Dad Rock. Join hosts Keith and Steve as they navigate the ages together, sharing love of music across various eras and genres. Always well-intentioned, often well-informed, seldom boring. The new Dad Rock will expand your mind.
Yeah, I went on a summer road trip, and I remember listening to Odelay by Beck, which is my favorite Beck album.
That was a big hit that summer. I remember listening to that. The first time I'd ever been to Montauk was that summer. That was out there. Ooh. I remember listening to it on my roof deck in Hoboken. This was just a good, fun time. And I would almost argue 1996, it was kind of like a good, fun time. It
was a good year. Yeah.
The world was somewhat at peace, maybe.
Totally.
There weren't a lot of big wars going on. People were still excited about the idea of the turn of the millennium, 2000.
I didn't have a Hotmail account yet. I'm not even sure I knew what the internet was. I mean, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I had a Vax account.
I think people had downloaded. Most people had probably, at least at one point or one computer, they had downloaded the free AOL software. So maybe you had that.
Oh my God! You had to dial up via a phone, via a modem on a phone. Yeah. I'm sorry, that was more my Jurassic Park impersonation. If we had any money, I'd hire a sound guy. So 1996, I went cross country, listened to Odelay. That was the big album. Visited Washington, Oregon, California. First time in San Francisco, July 3rd, 1996. Went to my first rave that night on July 4th. I mean, after that, I think I disappear into electronic music for 5 or 10 years. But Olivia Tremor Control was one of the bands that stuck with me over that period, for sure.
Yeah, well, it was funny that you said that you dipped into electronic music, because around 1996, there was a lot of people saying that rock is dead. They were declaring rock over. You had a little bit of a run in the early 90s of the grunge bands. And as we covered in the last couple of episodes, they were putting out their second and third albums, and they were, people are starting to say, this isn't quite doing it for me as much anymore. So rock was kind of dying out, but Olivia Tremor Control kind of set rock in a different direction, not necessarily a new direction.
You're the one who told me that Olivia had some new songs out. They put out this song called Garden of Light. It's on Bandcamp.
What's Bandcamp?
I was reading one of the comments. This is from Owen on Olivia Tremor Control's Bandcamp. I'm embarrassed to admit that I hadn't heard of OTC until Will Hart passed. This song was my first exposure to them. I was hooked. I went and listened to Dusk at Cuba's Castle immediately after. Can you imagine, Steve, that it's 2025 and that's the first time you've heard Olivia Tremor Control, and Garden of Light is the first song you've heard?
What is Bandcamp?
I was going to ask you what Bandcamp was. or how would you explain Bandcamp to someone? Because we were trying to explain cassettes to young people last time, and now how would you explain Bandcamp to old people?
Well, Bandcamp is just a site that they sell music on, and it's not affiliated with Apple Music or Spotify. And I think there's more artist control and distribution managed by the band. And I think they probably get a higher cut of the proceeds.
Probably. Okay, so Bandcamp is a direct digital distribution site for the bands themselves, which is crazy that the two guitarists in Olivia Tremor Control are now dead, and someone's managing their Spotify, and they put out 2 songs on the day that the second guitarist died, right?
Yeah, I think it was a total coincidence. I think the actual songs had been released, and he passed away later that day. But he had been.
That's just crazy.
Yeah. What did he have? MS. He had been, had health issues for a long time. He was in his early 50s. I want to say like 53 or 54. It just happened last
54
November of 24. And they had two main contributors, Will Cullen Hart, who passed away in November, and he was the more eclectic, artistic. Not that they weren't all artistic, but it was more avant-garde in his style. And then Bill Doss, who passed away in 2011 or 2012? 2012 of an aneurysm. He was in his early 40s at the time. He was the more psychedelic pop, many layers, very
Beatlesque.
Yeah, very Beatlesque, but very specific. Whereas Will Hart's was more experimental, but the two of them melded together to form Olivia Tremor Control, which was one of the most important bands, I think, of the 90s. And I think there were two bands that came out in 1996, them and Modest Mouse, with This Is a Long Drive for Someone with Nothing to Think About.
And then Interstate 8, which was what, like an EP with it?
Yeah.
Had some of the same songs?
A couple months later.
Yeah, that's actually the first disc I had. It was a CD. It was 5 songs, Interstate 8, Modest Mouse. Wow. This is like not the first time rock has died, right? Didn't it die in the 70s with
disco.
Disco?
And then disco was dead.
I mean, and then punk was dead. I mean, it's the wheel of life, right? The circle of life.
The circle of life.
Hakuna Matata.
Exactly.
It was interesting what electronic groups become popular or have the singles that make it onto the radio waves, because that's still, or MTV, I guess, were the two ways you still got mass distribution back then. But which band had the song Firestarter?
The Prodigy. Oh my God, Firestarter, fire! Like it was just like 7 minutes of saying Firestarter, and like this really anxious beat. It was very like, it was fun, but also the way it kept repeating and the way it was so fast, it gave you that anxiety. And toward Y2K, the anxiety just built and built.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So, yeah, electronic music is taking over. I mean, it's probably already going on, but it's getting into my ears now on a daily basis when I moved to San Francisco in late ~96. More on that later. But all right.
But if you think about it, though, the Beck album, Odelay, had, the Dust Brothers, which was...
That's what I was wondering.
That's a lot of reusing old music, reusing old beats, sampling. The Beastie Boys had been doing that earlier in their career, and now this was coming to the mainstream, Ill Communication being one of the biggest albums of the previous year. You now have that Dust Brothers sound where you're having the samples, you're having electronic beats added. We talked about PJ Harvey last time with the producer Flood adding to that a lot electronic sound. You had Bjork, you had Portishead. So electronic music was starting to bubble under, and then suddenly the Chemical Brothers, Prodigy, Underworld, all these bands are becoming mainstream, or you would hear them out if you were in cool places.
I was going to say, you never listened to Oasis at all, besides hearing on the radio, then changing the radio station, right?
No, but you have to admit, like, some of those songs are really good.
I mean, I love Wonderwall,
like
for sure.
Don't Look Back in Anger, I heard you say.
Champagne Supernova in the Sky. So, were Oasis the last real rock band? I mean, like, if you see Liam or Noel on Instagram, and they still talk so much shit, but like, I almost believe them. I almost believe they're the last rock band that had real rock band attitude. It's like pre-internet, pre-cell phones. People still kept secrets. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, they had that, tawdry, tabloid relationship between brothers, and always talking about lying and cheating and drugs and mayhem. Bands... They all have publicists, and they try to stay away from that now.
I'd read something recently whether maybe it was Rick Beato. Do you ever see that guy on YouTube?
Rick
Beato.
Let's pretend.
Anyway,
sure.
No. He's great. He was formerly in a band that I never heard of, but they were mildly successful. But and he's a guitar teacher basically, so that's why he's selling. But he does all these YouTube videos now, interviews or just talking about things. And he was talking about how there's no more rock bands anymore. And I think what he meant was there's no more bands anymore. Everything is like an individual. It's like Tom Petty would be an example of that. Or like there's just no bands anymore because you can't control a band.
Well,
and you definitely couldn't control Oasis.
Maybe not in the mainstream so much, but jam bands.
That's right.
Jam bands are certainly around. They're plentiful.
That's true.
Obviously, Fish is big in that scene. You have Dave Matthews Band, I would throw in there, Goose, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard.
Widespread Panic.
Even the Allman Brothers back in the day, I would throw it in this. The Grateful Dead, obviously, were the forebears. Even the Spin Doctors back in this era were trying to be a jam band with, 2 1-hour sets and a big drum solo and trippy space music.
It's amazing. Oh my.
But, I've been thinking about this. So bringing it back to the Olivia Tremor Control, and I feel like in 1996, all there was Olivia Tremor Control.
Besides Odelay, you mean? Besides Beck's Odelay, there's nothing else new that's going on. There's new band that kicks off with such originality out of nowhere, out of the deep bayou of Louisiana.
Yeah, but I think in 1996 when they released, so their album is called
Music from the Unrealized Film Script, Dusk at Cupis Castle.
I will argue this album picks up right where Abbey Road left off. So Abbey Road is the last album that the Beatles recorded. All right. Side 2 ends with a 16-minute medley. It starts with, "You never give me your money." We're probably getting sued for that. That was a long sample. Sun King, Mean Mr. Mustard, Polythene Pam, who came in through the bathroom window, and then Golden Slumbers, Carry the Weight, and the end. It's a barrage of totally interwoven songs. And, Paul McCartney played the last half of that, the last 3 of those, at the end of the SNL 50th anniversary ceremony. It was kind of cool. I mean, Paul's getting up there in the age and, sings
bad,
like
though.
an 80-year-old, but to see him playing that was pretty impressive. But so that's the
dude. I wish I sang like that 80-year-old.
Yeah, so that's the Beatles, and then Olivia is in 1996, a few years later, they pick up by throwing down an interrelated 18-minute gauntlet of their own. They come out spinning the Opera House, which is kind of almost a meta talk about we're in the movies, watching people move their mouths, and the religious figure is not really a religious figure because he's an actor. So it's very, a nod and a wink that we're in this movie that truly doesn't exist. Frost Ambassador, Jumping Fences, Define a Parent Dream. And then it gets into the last 2, which is kind of like Carry the Weight. And in the end, you have No Growing, whose chorus is "There's no growing in knowing where you're going," which, resonated with me and maybe you a couple of years out of college. There's no growing. And then Holiday Surprise, which was just a great introduction to a band. That first 18 minutes right there. If you don't fall in love, maybe you're not going to like Olivia Tremor Control, but that to me was a groundbreaking run.
It was, for me, a return to listening to a whole album. I mean, not to say Odelay again, but I think it's pretty rare that you listen to whole albums. I mean, especially now, but I think you can almost only listen to Olivia Tremor Control as a whole album.
Yeah, I mean, after that section on that whole album, it's a little bit more experimental, more like the White Album Beatles, and less like Abbey Road, which the other half is pop gems. But Can You Come Down With Us, Marking Time. There's a couple sections in the Green Typewriters, so they have this suite of songs. It's 9 in a row called Green. They're all called Green Typewriters, and a couple of them are pop songs. One of them is an 11-minute drone of traffic and ambient sound. So it gets very experimental.
I mean, those guys, and by those guys I mean all the people that made up the Elephant Six, who were from Rushton, Louisiana, and grew up together. Rob Schneider, who's of the Apples of Stereo, Jeff Magnum of Neutral Milk Hotel, Bill and Will, of course, and then the others that came into their circle. They would just record stuff at home and pass tapes around, and people would overdub and add and mix down, and it would be any weird sound, any weird instrument. There was so many different instruments they played. They'd switch instruments live when they finally did play live. But they love the collage.
It makes me wonder if they could have been a jam band, because I've seen great videos of them playing. And like you said, they have tubas, they have bassoons, they have oboes, they have other horns and woodwinds out there, glockenspiels, people switching instruments, an accordion. So I wonder if they could have been a jam band that put all that together, or if they were so reliant on the studio to make the
No.
So,
no, they were certainly a jam band. In fact, I don't think they could recreate what they did in the studio. They weren't, like, I saw them multiple times, including Acid Test in 1998 in San Francisco, where both Neutral Milk Hotel and Olivia Tremor Control played, and it was amazing. But it was like they would just switch instruments, and like the two bands would join each other. Jeff Magnum would join Olivia Tremor Control. He was actually one of the original drummers in Olivia Tremor Control, and like, they couldn't hold it together. So I think they're almost like a grunge jam band, if you will. Like, it was all over the place. Like the risk was that it wasn't musical.
Yeah. And I also think, I know there's always that artistic sentiment of like, we're not doing this to make money. We're doing this, to get our sound out. But I just wonder if there was a little bit more organization and a little bit, they could have reached a slightly larger audience, and then they could have gotten onto this self-sustaining circuit and then been able to play live, refine and hone their sounds and get the editing. Because the gist I got from them is they always had an issue editing in the studio. I interviewed Will and John Fernandez, and Peter Chick dipped in and out back in I want to say 2002, when Circulatory System was going around. They had one debut album. Circulatory System was a bunch of Olivia Tremor Control had broken off.
I don't know if that was the problem. I mean, I agree that maybe if they had been earlier or later, or especially in the internet era, if they would have taken off. But I mean, they were on this label Fly Daddy, and Fly Daddy eventually declares bankruptcy in like 99 or 2000. And well, not only, I mean, if I sold 40,000 records, it'd be amazing, but they sold 40,000 records, and they never saw any money from those 40,000 records. I mean, they got an advance, which helped record, they got tour supports, but they never made any money off their albums. And then the other thing was that their albums were out of print in like the early 2000s. So, I mean, this is right before, I guess, Napster, or maybe it's at the same time, but, peer-to-peer music sharing is going on. Early 2000s, but their records are out of print. That's just crazy. That I can't imagine someone's records being out of print anymore, because on demand and digital.
Yeah, it's rare to find something you're like, oh, it's not on Apple Music or Spotify or any of the bigger ones. You can always find it on Bandcamp
or YouTube.
Yeah,
YouTube will have some weird video that some random person downloaded.
So, how this all ties into 1996. We talked about it before. Rob Schneider for the Apples in Stereo, Jeff Mangum from Neutral Milk Hotel, Bill Doss and Will Cullen Hart together forming Olivia Tremor Control. Each group put out an album. Well, Fun Trick Noisemaker by the Apples in Stereo came out in 95, so that was bubbling under.
Oh, they made it out fird. Wow.
So
that makes sense. He's the producer.
Well, he's a producer, and Rob Schneider, I don't think was from, he had moved out into Denver, so I think he had maybe a little bit more focus. He had a studio. He was taken out of the scene a little bit. Sometimes when you're at home, it's a little harder to do it. But next was actually On Avery Island, the debut studio album by Neutral Milk Hotel, which was Jeff Mangum, who, yes, was originally the drummer of Olivia Tremor Control. He formed off Jeremy Barnes, I think Scott Spillane, who plays a lot of brass, was in that band as well. And On Avery Island, Garden Head, Leave Me Alone, just amazing. But what we've really been talking about a lot in this episode is music from the unrealized film script Dusk at Cubist Castle, the debut album by Olivia Tremor Control, released by Fly Daddy Records. And Fly Daddy Records, we had a little bit of a fly on the wall view because a mutual friend, or really Keith's friend that he introduced me to, worked at the record label. So we got a little bit of the inside scoop. And do you know the background of how Olivia ended up on Fly Daddy?
Well, I do know that Olivia was like shopping around for a label. And instead of, I guess, sending a demo, which is what you normally do, they sent copies of their self-published 7-inch records for California Demise and The Giant Day. And they sent that out to 20 labels or so. And, the only one that responded favorably was Fly Daddy. So that's how they ended up on Fly Daddy. And then Brian must have been an intern for the two founders, right? So he did all the actual work, which I think back then meant going to the post office and mailing stuff and getting mail.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And I can understand knowing those early, I guess you could call them demos, but self-released EPs. They're very rough to listen to, especially to, someone who's listening to make a pop hit. And many of those labels were. It's definitely a hard listen, but deep within those songs, if you have a little bit of a creative mind, California Demise is a great song.
I love it.
But the mixing and, the early versions of it can be rough on the ears. But to go from that into Dusk at Cubist Castle, where they fully realized their sound. So these guys, I think it was Bill Doss who said, or maybe it was Will, said, once they realized that the Beatles had recorded on a four-track recorder, and they had access to a four-track recorder, it just opened their mind, and it made them realize that they could do it too. And there's definitely a Beatles sound. I would argue that the beginning of Dusk at Cubist Castle, the first side, the first 20 minutes of it are, picking up the thread from Abbey Road.
I agree. The challenge, and you're talking about audio quality, is to record more and more tracks on a 4-track, you have to dump them down. That means if you record on tracks 1, 2, and 3, you can bump them down to 4, which means you have to decide what the levels are, and you record it down to 4. So now you free up tracks 1, 2, and 3. So now your 3 tracks are on a single track. And they would do that over and over and over again. Like they'd record on tracks 1 and 2, and then add tracks 1, 2 to the 3 tracks on 4, bump it to 3. So that's why you have the sound degrading, because you can't go back and change anything. You can't remove anything. You can't adjust levels. So it makes sense that it got denser, and that it got more lo-fi.
Yeah.
It just has to.
The fidelity is get lost with each round that you bump it down.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think despite all of the studio tomfoolery and the studio trickery, I think they would have made a great jam band. I mean, I've seen a couple. I only saw them when they got back together in 2005 at the Bowery Ballroom, and they were great. But I've seen clips of them, back in Terrastock, back in 1996 and 97, and they looked amazing. And I think you saw them back then, right?
Yeah, I mean, I got to see Neutral Milk Hotel 3 times in 7 days, 2 nights in a row at Bottom of the Hill, which was 300 people, and then at Terrastock West in '98, where Olivia played. It was phenomenal. I actually met the guys from Neutral Milk Hotel, and he's very, very shy, Jeff. I thanked them, and then you could tell it was already bizarre, but it was right before they played. Which was a great set. Mm-hmm. And then I saw Olivia also, but probably 97 at Bottom of the Hill, which was a great venue in the Potrero Hill Mission area of San Francisco.
Well, I think
again, 200-300 people.
Were you at the show? It was Sunshine Fix. So after Dusk at Cubist Castle in '96, Black Foliage was their next.
Black Foliage
was their next album in '99ish. Is that right?
Sure.
And then shortly therereafter, they kind of they just kind of went their separate ways. And Bill Doss led the Sunshine Fix, and we saw them at the bottom of the hill on the same night that George Harrison had passed away. And I remember him dedicating the show to George Harrison. I think you were at that show with me.
It sounds, if I was in town, I was there.
Yeah.
I remember Brian had gotten an advanced tape of Black Foliage, and we went up to Vermont and listened to it in his car. So we're like at a cabin, but we had to sit in the car to listen to it because that was the only audio we had. We had guitars, but we didn't have any boombox. And it's not the first song is not on the album. Like, they had this really crazy one with so many different voices. I think it was like It's a Train Conductor, but they had way more like affected animal voices and such. I think Fly Daddy was like, no, you got to redo this a little, whatever they could do.
Right.
I think I found the tape, by the way. I think I have the tape.
All right.
And I even bought like off Amazon a $30 tape player that converts to digital, but that takes a bunch of work and I haven't done it yet. But I might have one of the only tapes of this crazy Black Foliage preview.
That would be amazing.
It would be amazing. I've looked for it online. So, I mean, I'm sure someone else has it. I'm sure the guys in the band have it.
Yeah. So I guess back to your original question, what would I think if today I heard the new Olivia Tremor Control song, Garden of Light?
It was
if Garden of Light
first time
was
you
the
heard
first
them.
time I had ever heard them, one thing I would think is, hey, is this the new King Gizzard or is this old King Gizzard? Because it really does sound a little bit like that. But you know, for after a few seconds, I would realize that it wasn't. But to me, it sounds a little bit more like Sunshine Fix than Olivia Tremor Control, where I think their styles blended together. And then the other song, The Same Place, which is a Will written song. Again, this sounds more like Circulatory System versus Olivia Tremor Control. And if you listen to, you know, the whole group, and I could just imagine this jam band that Will and Bill had lived on. And, you know, for the last 10 years, we've been watching them play, you know, the two Olivia Tremor Control albums plus their B-sides. Circulatory System had 3 albums, I believe, and Sunshine Fix had at least 2 or 3 plus B-sides. And if you got all of that grouping together and you could just play a 2.5 hour jam band experience, it would just be amazing, even if they didn't put any more work out. And supposedly they were putting at work on a double album back at the time when Bill Doss died back in 2012. It was supposedly near complete, but all we've gotten are these 2 songs. They said it was going to be a double album. We got 7 minutes.
That is crazy. I mean, that's crazy. I didn't hear that story about the double album coming out. I will say what's even crazier to me is that so back in 2000, Fly Daddy goes bankrupt. Their albums are out of print. And John Fernandez, who's the bassist, I believe, in the band, he actually found the Fly Daddy guys and paid them $4,000 for the rights to the records that were out of print.
And then I believe they recorded, they formed Cloud Recordings, and it was kind of their own label. And I think that was up and running for a couple of years. And I remember their albums being available then in that 2002, 2003, 2004 range. Because I would have interviewed them in 2003 when I worked at Splendid. And I also interviewed Jeremy Barnes, who played with that whole group. He's a member of Neutral Milk Hotel, but he's in his own things.
I mean, we didn't even touch on Neutral Milk Hotel to any extent. I was fortunate. There was a year when I probably saw the bands 8 or 9 times, met them in person, went to some legendary shows at the peak of their powers. And like, this is pre-internet. Like, I guess I'm getting the weekly Bay Guardian paper. Like, I don't know how you follow bands. You know what I mean? You'd have to just look who that was coming through all your favorite shows. I mean, all your favorite spots. And then hopefully you'd recognize that your band was coming. Hopefully you could get tickets because you'd actually have to go there to buy the tickets. You couldn't do it online or on your phone. So it was always hit or miss whether you could get tickets or not. So,
and the venue is uphill both ways. It was usually raining and the wind was blowing straight up into my umbrella, which was then raining down upon me.
San Francisco did have rain in the late 90s. You are correct, sir.
That is correct. All right. Well, 1996, well known for Where It's At and Odelay by Beck, Going the Distance by Cake, Champagne Supernova by Oasis. But to the new dad rock, it was all about Modest Mouse, This Is a Long Drive, for those with nothing to think about, or for someone with nothing to think about, and Interstate 8, as well as the Olivia Tremor Control music for the unrealized film Dusk at Cubist Castle.
Yeah, and everything about the Elephant Six Collective. So really, it was 19E6.
Oh, I see what you did there. So clever and so on brand for the new dad rock. We hope you will join us on this musical exercise, this musical journey, this musical trip into the foundry, into the foundation of the genre of music that we call the new dad rock.